Today we have Dr. Davies, who is an associate professor at Duquesne University. And his areas of research focus on forecasting, consumer psychology, the international economics, and mathematical economics. He has lectured at many venues, including the American Economic Association, the Econometric Society, and the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Also, you can find his publications in many journals, including the Journal of Econometrics, the Journal of Consumer Psychology, and the International Journal of Forecasting. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Davies.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming out. Today's topic is immigration, and I want to start off by basically asking the question, why should we care at all about immigration? The argument I'm going to give you is that not only should we care, we should care perhaps a lot more than we currently are. Firstly, labor, of course, is the source of all productivity. You can say, well, productivity also comes from materials and technology and so forth, but I would argue all those things have their root in labor. Things that today are valuable materials only because some labor somewhere in the past figured out you can use this stuff to do something interesting with. A good example is the evolution of energy. Once upon a time, trees were the energy source. You cut them down, you burn them, this sort of thing. Then we figured out how to use coal. We figured out how to use oil. We figured out how to use nuclear power. And as we figure out all these things, all of a sudden these resources that weren't of any use to us before now become useful, they become productive. And the source of that ability to use resources comes from labor. So, in one sense, immigration is important because immigration is about labor, and labor is a source of all productivity. Another reason it's important is not only because of this, and what you see is the immigration rate in the United States has doubled since 1970. Back in 1970, you had under 2 immigrants for every 1,000 Americans, and now we're up to almost 4. What's interesting, though, is if you look at immigration as a percentage of the population, immigration has grown from 20% of net births back in 1970 to 68% today. What does that mean? That means that over half of the Americans that are coming into existence are coming into existence because of immigration. So in a very real sense, when you set immigration policy, you're altering in a fundamental way the nature, the character of what the next generation's Americans will be. So where do immigrants come? Where do they go? Principally, the majority of immigrants into the United States come from Mexico, and they go to California. Number of Mexican immigrants is more than 3 times the number of immigrants from China and India combined. And most of them go to California. The runners-up are New York and New Jersey. These are H1B immigrants. And this is a very different story. If you go back to immigrants as a whole, so we're predominantly Mexican immigrants, H1B visas, H1B immigrants are typically Indians. I'm going to talk a little bit about lesser skilled immigrants. I'm going to focus most of the talk on H1B immigrants. But in both cases, there's some conventional wisdom that I want to address. 2 sources of conventional wisdom. First is the impact on the unemployment rate. The conventional wisdom says immigrants take jobs away from Americans. Therefore, the more immigration we have, the more unemployment we should see. The second piece of conventional wisdom is that immigrants affect the income distribution. The immigrants that come in, by and large, will tend to populate the lower income echelons. Therefore, you'll have a greater disparity in income as we admit more immigrants to this country. What you're looking at here is immigration and the unemployment rate. And the way you read this is, as you go from left to right, you've got more immigration, and as you go from the bottom up, you have more unemployment. Every dot here is a year. And you're looking at 1970 through 2008, nothing special about that range, that's just the data that was easily available. And what you see is there's not any clear relationship between immigration and unemployment. So this at least calls into question this conventional wisdom that immigrants take American jobs. here's the income distribution. You know what the Gini coefficient is? You heard this animal? Gini coefficient measures income equality. And roughly speaking, goes like this. The lower the Gini coefficient is, the more equal our income distribution is. The higher the Gini coefficient is, the more unequal the income distribution is. So you can figure like on the two extremes. On one extreme where Gini is 0, everybody's earning the same thing. The other extreme where Gini is 100, you've got one person who has all the income, everybody else is destitute. What you're looking at here is immigration along the horizontal plotted against the Gini coefficient. And if it weren't for these 4 dots right here, this would look kind of like a positive relationship, that the more immigration you have, indeed, the more inequality you have amongst income. Those 4 dots, by the way, are 89 to 92. Did you notice back here, when you're looking at immigration, see this? See that spike? That's those same years, 89 to 92. Anybody know what was going on there?
Merca.
You used an acronym. I don't know what it means. What is it?
Merca, the Immigration Reform and Control Act.
Yes. Yes. I know it by different letters for some reason, but those are the words. Yeah, Immigration Control and Reform Act. This was a period in which we relaxed many of the restrictions on immigration. You know the details more than I do, but I can recall I was in graduate school at the time saying to my classmates, who were almost all of them immigrants, tear up your visa, because under the law it appears that you're granted citizenship if you're undocumented. But that's what that is. But if you take those dots out of the picture, it seems to be the case that there's at least some argument in the data that more immigration leads to greater inequality. And so I'll show you that just to be honest with the data. But I'll tell you in the same vein, I don't like this Gini coefficient. And here's why. When we talk about equality of income and the Gini coefficient, what's in the back of your head is that the world is a better place with more equal income distribution. And when you think of unequal income distribution, you think of the world as a worse place. And in fact, that's not necessarily what the Gini coefficient is showing you. Let me show you income from another perspective. What you're looking at here is in 1980, this is in 2003 dollars. So for those of you that don't care the economics of it, think inflation has been filtered out of this. So what I'm going to show you has nothing to do with inflation. This is 1980, and what you're looking at is the percentage of households in each of these income categories. So for example, we had whatever this is, about 6% of our households were earning above $100,000, about 8% were earning $75,000 to $100,000. The two big brackets were these, the $50,000 to $75,000, about 20% of households were there. And then there's this one, the under $15,000, about 19% of households were there. That's in 1980. Now, fast forward 20 years to 2003. And what do you see? Every one of these brackets has declined. So the percentage of households earning less than $15,000 has dropped. The percentage of households earning 15 to 20 have dropped. 25 have dropped. All these have dropped. The only two that have increased are 75 to 100 and over 100,000. What that says is, in a very real sense, remember this has nothing to do with inflation, in a very real sense, everybody's getting richer, at least over this 20-year period that you're looking at. Now, interestingly, the Gini coefficient would tell you that the United States has become a less equal place. There's more inequity. And the gut reaction is, well, more inequity is a bad thing. What I'm trying to show you with this graph is, what really matters is how much people are earning. And what you're seeing is people in all these lower income brackets, forget about lower income brackets, this is a middle income bracket. These are all dropping. People are moving where? They're all moving up, well, no, they're not all moving up, but in net, they're moving up to 75 and over 100 range. Why is the Gini coefficient saying that the United States has become a less equitable place to live? The reason it's saying that is because the Gini coefficient does not ask, are you better off? It simply asks, how different are you compared to others? So if, for example, we had everybody in this room, you're eating, I can't ask you, who are you? RJ. Everybody in this room, we're all earning $50,000. Next year, we're all earning 75, except for RJ, who's earning 300. Are we better off or not? Most people will say, yeah, we're better off. We're earning 50,000 before, now we're earning 75 now, except for RJ, he's earning 300. But if you measure us by the Gini coefficient, we're actually a less equitable society. We're a less equitable society. So, Anyway, that's something to think about as you're looking at this conventional wisdom. So 2 points. First, increased immigration does not coincide with increased unemployment. It appears to coincide with less equitable income distribution, but I've got a problem with the whole measurement of equitable income distribution. Anyway, I don't think it's measuring something as meaningful. All right, so here's my claim. My claim is when we have immigration, it is not simply people coming into the country. Immigration itself is a filter. The immigrants who come in are a different sort of person than the average person from their country of origin. Why so? To immigrate requires you doing what? It requires you picking up yourself or your family, moving to a place you've never been before, to do who knows what. Maybe if you're lucky you've got a job lined up. More likely than not, you don't. You're going there for an education hoping to get something later, or you're going there, for some temporary work and hoping for something permanent in the future. In short, on average, the people who will immigrate are people who have this spirit of risk-taking, of what we would call entrepreneurship. The attributes of an entrepreneur, on average, are more represented in immigrants than they are in people who do not immigrate. So you've got this entrepreneurial filter, which takes us from foreign nationals to the foreign workers in the U.S., and we'll break those down to lower skilled and higher skilled. And I argue there are two things that influence this entrepreneurial filter. One is the minimum wage, the other is the quality of our higher education. So if you think of this, of immigration, there's this filter that's going to filter and bring in principally entrepreneurial types. The power of this filter is going to be influenced by these two things. First, let's talk about the lower skilled labor. There's a supply effect and there's a demand effect. The supply effect, with respect to the minimum wage, goes something like this. If we increase the minimum wage in this country, what do American jobs look like to foreign, lesser skilled workers? They look really darn good. So you get the supply effect of the foreign workers have more incentive to come into the United States. Now the problem is this is difficult to measure. It's difficult to measure because immigration is capped. We only let certain people in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the supply of illegal immigrants and take that as a proxy for the supply of unskilled immigrants. So what I'm doing is the following. I cannot answer the question, how does minimum wage relate to immigrants? Because immigrants are artificially capped. They're capped, meaning, when I say artificial, what I mean is the numbers that you get are not going to be reflective of the economic reality. So instead, let's look at illegals. Illegals are not capped, and to some extent, we can at least estimate them. Here's what you're looking at. Here's the minimum wage going from left to right. This is 1970 to 2007. And here's aliens expelled. This is voluntary departures. You know the difference between voluntary and involuntary departures? Basically, the voluntary departures you have not broken any American laws, with the exception of being here illegally. So, to speed up the whole system, we'll turn you around and send you off. Makes the deportation go much more quickly. What you're seeing is, so this is and by the way, if you break it down by involuntary versus voluntary departures, the voluntary departures are the lion's share of illegal immigrants, at least the ones that we can document. And what do you see? The higher the minimum wage, the higher this involuntary departures. That's our proxy measure for the demand, the supply of immigrants coming into this country. Those set of dots kind of stick out a little bit. In fact, if I could take them away, they'd make my case look even better. And those dots are post-9/11. So you would expect in the post-9/11 world that this relationship between the minimum wage and the number of undocumented workers trying to come into the country would alter. On average, you can say something like this. Prior to 9/11, every 10% increase in the minimum wage, on average, gave us a 7% increase in low-skilled immigration. Post 9/11, it's about a 5% increase in low-skilled immigration. There's also a demand effect. So not only is it the case that as our minimum wage goes up, low-skilled foreign workers have more incentive to come into the United States, but as our minimum wage goes up, American employers have greater incentive to hire these foreign workers that are coming into the United States. And this is also difficult to measure because productivity measures are difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a proxy. My things are all messed up. I'm going to look at a proxy of unemployment for educated versus uneducated workers. And here's what I want to get at. If you are an American employer and the government says, okay, you used to pay your minimum wage workers $5 an hour, now you're going to pay $7. Rationally, what are you going to do? Rationally, you're going to look around here and say, how much are you contributing to my company? If you're contributing more than $5 an hour, or sorry, more than $7 an hour, that's fine, we'll keep you on. If you're contributing less than $7 an hour, I can't afford to keep you. So when I'm faced with a choice of keeping the worker or not keeping the worker as this minimum wage goes up, on average, there are exceptions, but on average, I'm going to tend to want to keep the worker who shows them more productivity. What I'm arguing to you is go back to this immigration as an entrepreneurial filter. If the immigrants who are coming in, on average, tend to exhibit entrepreneurial traits, it will tend to be those people that I will want to keep in my employ. So this all becomes extremely difficult to measure, but what I'll do is, a proxy, is look at minimum wage, its impact on educated versus uneducated workers. These things are easy to measure. I'll take that as a proxy for the entrepreneurial, go-get-em type workers versus the ones that are less entrepreneurial. Here's workers with college degrees. You can take this as a proxy for the more productive workers. And what you see is as the minimum wage goes up, there's no impact on unemployment. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. Now here's unemployment as a whole. Now you get a little bit of a story to tell. It seems to be the case as the minimum wage goes up, you get a little bit more unemployment. There are these dots down here that are a bit annoying, and I can make them go away like that. You know what those dots are? Any idea? That's the height of the dot-com craze. That's 1997, 1998, 1999, where unemployment across the board was at historic lows. All right, but even so, you say, well, it's not really fair to take those dots out. You can leave them in. Maybe if you have enough to drink, you can argue there's a relationship there. Otherwise, maybe there isn't. Let's push the issue. Let's look at workers with less than a high school education. Now it becomes unmistakable. There's this clear relationship. The higher the minimum wage, the higher the unemployment amongst those with less than a high school education. There are my three annoying dots. So what's the story here? The story here goes something like this. On the supply side, as the minimum wage goes up, foreign workers have greater incentive to move to the United States. Also, as minimum wage goes up, American firms have greater incentive to focus their employment on more productive workers. And I'm arguing, on average, the more productive workers, all other things constant, are going to tend to be the immigrants because of this entrepreneurial filter. All right. How about high-skilled workers? There's also a demand and a supply effect here. The supply effect here is, interestingly, our higher education. Higher education in this country attracts a tremendous number of foreign, hoping to be immigrants. Do you know what our top net export is in this country? Do you know? What's our top net export? No, it's not. I don't know. Yep. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I can find out in a minute. I was hoping you'd tell me. There it is. It's financial services, followed by semiconductors, plastic materials, film and television tape rentals. That was an odd thing. The number, what are we at here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 is higher education. This is a huge net export. In fact, I'm not showing you the growth figures, but if you look at growth in exports over time, this is one of our most consistent and solidly growing areas of net export. What do you mean by net export of higher education? Well, when a foreign national comes to this country for a college degree, that's effectively exporting an education. You can't take the education sent it abroad, but you can take the foreign brain into the country and infuse the education. So this is the supply effect. As our higher education is of greater quality, foreign nationals are more apt to want to come to this country to obtain education. All right, so how do H1B approvals alter our U.S. demographics? Here are the H1B demographics. Most of these people are in the prime of their earning years. So you've got most of them are 25 to 29, age group 30, 34, a little bit less than this. Here's compared to the U.S. population as a whole. Right, so we've got a lot of children and teenagers there. We have some people over 65, and here's the U.S. population in between. So one of the things that happens as we allow more H1B applicants into the country is that we alter the demographics of our workforce in favor of those who are in the prime of their earning years, the prime of their productivity. Here's another thing that happens. This is the breakdown of education by H1B applicants. The majority of them have bachelor's degrees, some master's. This is professional degrees, that's like JDs, MBAs, that sort of thing. MDs, doctoral degrees are here. There's the population as a whole. Predominantly, these people who are coming in, the H1B applicants, are on average much higher, much more educated than the population as a whole. So by admitting H1B applicants, you significantly alter the demographics of our population. Now, as I'm saying this, keep in the back of your mind that it's immigrants that are accounting for 68% of our net births. Sorry, let me say it differently. Our net births are here. 68% of that is immigrants. You can imagine in another decade or two, growth in our population will be as much due to immigration as it will be to us having children. Yes, sir?
Do you know, are these new immigrants or these folks that were here on student visas that reapply after they've been educated in America, or are they coming with their education from abroad?
Are they coming with what?
Are they coming with their education from abroad already?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how that breaks down. Some of them will be people who are here applying for H1B. Others will be.
Anecdotally, the people who come into our office, a lot of some say it's mostly folks who've already been here, have a relationship with the company from the university nearby.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I've observed, which is that the data strongly suggests that if you want an education on planet Earth, the United States is the place to do it. Higher education. All right. One of the arguments that you're going to hear is, all right, fine, we've got all these productivity arguments, but the fact is we have problems already. For example, Social Security. And the more people we let into the United States, the more drain there is going to be on the system that's already overstressed. So, question, are H1B approvals a drain on Social Security? What you're looking at here is the expected Social Security contributions and benefit withdrawals over the course of lifetime of an H1B immigrant. Now, let me put a little footnote there. When I say H1B immigrant, what I mean is someone with at least a bachelor's degree. And you see this thing rises as you go forward because what's going on, the average worker over time, this is age 30, the average worker over time is earning more and more money. As the average worker earns more and more money, he's now paying more and more into the Social Security system. So this is all money coming into Social Security. Here at age 67, this person retires and starts to draw Social Security benefits. And the benefits come in, and notice they're showing as negative, and they're growing because Social Security is indexed for inflation. Actually, it's a little bit more than inflation if you do the math. So this person's getting more and more money. And notice it starts to tail off there. You know why? Yeah, this is an expectation. So I've taken into account the probability of you being alive. So as you get older, the probability of the person dying increases, and of course, when you die, your Social Security benefits stop, so that thing starts to go towards zero. All right, what's the long and short of the story? The long and short of the story is the present value of those Social Security benefits is about $320,000 compared to the present value of this. So the present value of Social Security tax is $320,000 versus the present value of Social Security benefits is about $60,000. You comfortable with the term present value? Give you an example. Can I have your paper? I have this piece of paper, and on this piece of paper, I write, Davies promises to pay you $500 on January 1st, 2011. It's here. How much are you going to pay for that piece of paper? Less than 500. How come? Well, in part, there's the risk that you're never going to find Davies. Let's put that aside for the moment. Let's suppose that I stick a GPS on my forehead, so you always know where I am. So you're guaranteed to get the $500 on January 1st, 2011. You're still not going to pay the full $500. How come? Yeah, there's an inflation issue that by 2011 the money's not going to be worth $500. There's also a time value thing that I've got to have $500 of my money tied up in this stupid piece of paper for the next X years. So what is your name?
Jared.
Jared? So let's suppose If Jared says, okay, Davey, I'll pay you $475 for that piece of paper. That number, $475, is the present value of this thing. So when you think of present value, think in terms of what is the thing worth today. So what I'm showing you here is the net present value of an immigrant. So take the amount of money he's going to pay in Social Security minus the amount of money he's going to draw out. That comes to about $250,000. Say in other words, every H1B visa immigrant you admit to this country, it has the same effect as putting $250,000 into the Social Security budget immediately. Every H1B visa immigrant admitted has the same effect as if you put $250,000 into the Social Security budget immediately. All right, now what about the H1B immigrants that come into the country that...
What's your real wage growth assumption for that graph?
It is a historic wage growth for college-educated folk, which is nominal, circa 5%. Figure a inflation of around 3%, so you're talking about 2% growth, 2% real growth. And you can play with those numbers. You don't like it a little bit, you can alter it, and you'll get, instead of being $250,000, you could get up to $300,000, you get down to $200,000. But however you alter the assumption, you're still in that range of $200,000 to $300,000.
And this is the person who enters the U.S. at age 30?
Yeah, assuming that the person not necessarily enters at age 30, but admitted as an H1B applicant. So you can figure the person's here as a student, maybe perhaps prior. What about the H1Bs that come in and don't stay? So they contribute to Social Security and they leave. They're actually, you might think that's a better deal. They're here, they're contributing to Social Security, and they leave, and you never have to pay them off. It's actually a worse deal. That's only worth $50,000 in present value. How come? Because, why is it a worse deal? It's a worse deal because all these extra years of payment that they're putting in far exceeds the amount that they're going to be pulling out. So it's actually better to admit the H1Bs on a permanent basis. All right. That's not the end of their contribution. What do they contribute in income taxes? There's an interesting study. You can find this online. The Technology Policy Institute, a woman by the name of Arlene Holland, wrote this. And by her estimate, I haven't looked at these numbers, but by her estimate, relaxing H-1B and green card restrictions over 2003 and 2007, so those 5 or so years, would have resulted in $8 billion in additional federal tax revenue. Income tax revenue. $8 billion. Now, one of the arguments that you're going to hear against the H-1B is that H-1B immigrants are they're discriminated against by employers. Employers would take advantage of them. I can get this. I can get the H-1B immigrant because of the restrictions placed on this person. I can get him for $50,000 versus $75,000 for an American. There's an interesting way to test that. And that's to look at the one industry that really doesn't have H-1B restrictions on it. It's higher education. Higher education, they have some restrictions, but not nearly the suite of restrictions that apply to industry as a whole. So let's look at wages paid at colleges and universities. And what you see is something like this. And this is for 2003, nothing special about the date other than that's what was readily available. And the blue is average salaries. Sorry, it's not average. This is the first quartile, the median, the third quartile. So think about the lower 25%. This is the half mark. This is the upper 25%. These are the salaries paid to the H-1B, starting H-1B visa immigrants. All right, so this is starting salary. The red are the salaries for instructors, which would, in our nomenclature, is a starting position in higher education. And what you see is there's a little bit of a difference here. The H-1Bs are being paid less at on the lower 25%. When you talk about the median salary, it's about the same for the two. And actually, if you look at the higher end, the H-1Bs who are being paid at the top 25th percentile, they're actually making more than their American counterparts. So this would suggest that the argument that American employers actually are just going to take advantage of the foreign workers is false. All right, now, let's get to the meat of the thing. The interesting thing about the H-1B visa workers H1B immigrants is not anything that I've just shown you. The cool stuff is this. What do they do besides work? 25% of engineering and technology firms founded from 1995 to 2005 were founded by H1B immigrants. And here's 25% of the U.S. This is almost 40% of engineering tech firms in California were founded by H1B visa immigrants. New Jersey's number 2. Georgia and Massachusetts, I don't know why they're on there for 3 and 4, because they are. Anybody here from Georgia or Massachusetts? What do you do that's particularly attractive for H1B visa immigrants?
In Massachusetts, it's the biotech field.
Okay, yeah, so there's synergies. If you already have a biotech field, people will be attracted there also. How many jobs do they occupy and how many jobs do they create? Here are jobs occupied by H1B visa immigrants. This is the argument that you're going to get of, look, these are jobs that would have gone to Americans. That aren't going to Americans, they're now going to foreigners. This, however, is only half the story. Think about the jobs that the H1B immigrants create. I'll give you only 5 examples. Intel, Sun Microsystems, Yahoo, Google, and eBay, all of which were either founded or co-founded by H1B visa immigrants. Intel, Amy Grove from Hungary, as of 2008, was employing 86,000 people. Sun Microsystems, Bechtolsheim, and Koschler from Germany and India, respectively, were employing almost 35,000 people. Take just those 5 companies and stack up their jobs against the jobs that are being held by H1B immigrants. And it dwarfs every year except 2001. Moral of this story is what? If you want to make the argument, I've got a problem with the argument, but if you want to make the argument that H1B visa immigrants are taking jobs that would otherwise go to Americans, you've got to flip it around and ask the other half of the question. How many jobs are they creating? And they're actually creating at least as many as are occupied. So in a net sense, we have the same number of jobs we had before. Now, I've got a big problem. Well, I'll leave it at that. Let me show you the next thing. How much do we pay them? There's a flip side to that question as well, which is how much value are they creating? Look at this. This is the wages we pay to H1B visa immigrants, H1B immigrants over the course of 2000 to 2005. Okay, so this is in millions and thousands. These are billions of dollars. In 2000, we paid $6 billion to H1B employees. We paid almost $10 billion in 2001. That's all income earned by H1Bs. If you want to think of that, as quote-unquote American value being paid to foreigners, I've got a problem with that statement. But if you want to think about it like that, you've got to look at the reverse, which is how much value are these H1B immigrants creating. Let's look at just those 5 companies. Intel, Sun Microsystems, Yahoo, Google, and whatever the other one was. Okay. Intel's worth, as of 2008, $86 billion. Google, $110 billion. There are the other ones. Stack that up against the wages we paid, and you get something like this. The total value created by just those 5 or 6 H1B immigrants exceeds by a factor of 20 or 30 all the wages we have paid to all of the H1B immigrants over the past 5 years. All right. So, what's the argument? The argument is H1B immigrants, from a financial standpoint, are not a drain on our economy at all. They're a huge plus. Now, keep in the back of your mind, as I'm showing you these numbers, I'm showing you direct jobs and direct value. I'm not showing you indirect. Do you know the difference? I buy a car from you. In so doing, I support the creation of a job. That's the guy who sold me the car, the guy who manufactured the car. There are also indirect jobs that are created. The guy who's going to service my oil. The guy who's going to make the tires I'm going to buy eventually when I replace. The guy who runs the gas station where I buy my gas. All those indirect jobs. I haven't counted any of those. All this is direct jobs only. All right, second. Next point. H1B reduces outsourcing. Anybody have a big problem with outsourcing here? Tell me, because I'm going to hit it kind of hard. Do you have a problem? No. Sorry, yes, no? Who cares? You're scared? Okay, good. Because I'll show you something that will cause you not to be so scared. Outsourcing is this big thing, and I'll show you in this country. Here are the numbers that become alarming. We outsource, we're second on the planet to Germany. Well, this was 2002. We may actually be number one now. Outsourced in 2002, almost 45. There's got to be billions. I can't be trillions. $45 billion worth of jobs outsourced. So we're number 2 on the planet. What's the problem with that number? Any ideas? I claim we aren't a huge outsourcer. You've got to look at it relative to the size of our economy. If you look at it relative to our size economy, to the size of our economy, that's us. That's our outsourcing divided by the total economic activity in the country. So number 1 is actually Angola, followed by Congo, Mozambique, Ireland, Venezuela, India, interestingly, is a huge outsourcer compared to us. And that's not the end of the thing. You've also got to think about the insourcing. We actually insource more jobs than we outsource here. If you take those into account, we are, this is insourcing less outsourcing. We're in a net positive. All right, who cares about the insourcing outsourcing thing? I raise this issue because that's the alternative to H1B immigration. I'll give you an example. I was involved with a company a couple of years ago that was an internet thing that did internet stuff. I'm not going to explain to you. Internet stuff is not explainable. It's just this odd thing. So anyway, long and short is, we had to hire some programmers. We outsourced all the programming to Russia. How come? We needed a particular skill, particular type of programming that a lot of programmers in this country don't have, and those that do have it want, gargantuan wages that we couldn't pay as a startup. So we looked around to see, could we bring somebody in from the outside? And we bump up against the H1B stuff. That's a huge problem. We can't bring anybody in. So what's the alternative? The alternative is, if you can't bring the worker to the job, you send the job to the worker. So the outsourcing actually becomes a substitute good for the H1B immigration. All right, so here, what's the summary? First, immigration is an entrepreneurial filter. It's not simply foreigners that are coming into this country. It is a particular type who, on average, are going to have entrepreneurial talents. H1B immigrants are net contributors to Social Security. Each one is worth about $250,000, present value terms. They create jobs. Actually, they create about as many jobs, possibly more if you count indirect jobs, than they use. And they create a tremendous amount of value compared to the wages that they earn. As you think about forming immigration policy, keep in your head that what you are doing is formulating what the next generation of Americans is going to look like. And I'll give you this warning. Oops, where's my warning? It's not there. I'll give you my warning. My warning is this. What is that? This entrepreneurial spirit, and this is the engine that drives the economy. The entrepreneurial spirit that drives the economy is a function of the people. Meaning what? It's a function of these immigrants who are looking to come to this country. If we don't allow them in here, they're going to go somewhere else. And they're going to be entrepreneurs. And they're going to be contributing to an economy, it just won't be ours. So the question before you, as you think about immigration policy, one of the things to keep in mind is, do you want these people creating value in this country, or do you want them creating value somewhere else? Because they're going to create the value. The question before you is, where are they going to do it? Do you have any questions I can answer?
Thank you. We're going to have a time of question and answer right now, so please raise your hand so I can give you the mic. And also, before you leave, if you could fill out the blue sheet, the survey, before you go, that would be wonderful. And can we all join in thanking Dr. Davies for coming? Questions?
I'll tell you something while you're thinking about possible questions. I'm an econometrician by trade, so my thing is to do data analysis. And what I've shown you here is not data analysis. I've just shown you graphs and pictures. If you perform the actual serious data analysis, the story you come up with will be consistent with what I've shown you. So as you look at these pictures, do not take them as proof of what I'm telling you, but rather take them as an indication that at the very least, if you're thinking that the world does not look this way, it's worth further examination. Because at first glance, the data says that this is the way the world looks. Yes, sir?
Would you raise the cap on H1Bs based off of what?
I'd eliminate it entirely. I think from what I've seen, it's a no-brainer.
Do you think there's a point where there's too many, or just?
That's a good question. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I cannot think why there would be. However, if that does exist somewhere, it is so far beyond where we currently are that it's not showing up in the data. So you might imagine if you want to play it safe, don't blow the cap off all at once, but schedule in a substantial increase over a 5-10 year period. Yes, ma'am.
In saying that, though, you've admitted yourself that with your startup company, you couldn't afford to pay a programmer in the United States what the going rate was, and you had to outsource.
Right.
And so you're saying that by flooding the market with H1Bs, wages would come down because of that.
Yes, the wages would come down because of the competition. But keep in mind, what I'm not saying is this. The American programmers paid $200,000 and the Russian programmers paid $100,000. If we allow the Russians in, all these wages come down to $100 as well. Instead, what I'm saying is the American programmer doesn't have a job. Because in my case, it was not a situation of hire the Russian or hire the American. It was hire the Russian or go out of business. So there was not a $200,000 job that was going to disappear. Now, it is not the case, don't get me wrong, it is not the case that this is a win-win for everybody. There are people who are going to be seriously hurt by this, amongst them the $200,000 American program. What I am saying is, if you look at society as a whole, this is a clear win. So the number of wins is going to far outweigh the number of losses. But there are going to be some losses. Yes?
I have a friend who does H1B visas, and I think she's been saying, she's turning in all her stuff actually in a couple of weeks.
Uh-huh.
She can come today. But the demand has been a lot lower due to the economy.
Sure.
Have you been hearing the same thing?
Yeah, clearly demand is low because of the economy. It is not just, I would argue, as of today, it's less a matter of the fundamentals of the economy than it is uncertainty. Everybody's sitting, American industry is sitting by and large quietly until things settle down and know what the rules of the game are moving forward. Once that's established, you'll start to see things pick up.
Particularly, I'm not sure. I guess the question is always right now, what type of reform is going to, with a whole comprehensive immigration, possibly reform,
Right.
what is going to happen with H1B visas, but
I don't know, but it's a really exciting thing for you all because you get to decide what the next generation of Americans is going to look like. We've been saying repeatedly, we need more Americans who are in science, engineering, technology, mathematics. There are two ways to do that. One way is to have kids, educate them. In 30 years from now, you'll have some scientists. The other way is let the H1Bs in. They're already made. And 75% of them say they want to stay here. So that's it. They're Americans. You got mathematicians overnight. Yes, sir.
If you reduce obstacles for H1B visas, are you saying that the entrepreneurial spirit will maintain the same amount, or with less obstacles, you're actually going to see a reduction?
Yeah, I'd argue that it's going to stay the same because what's driving that, when I talk about as an entrepreneurial filter, what I'm talking about is whatever it is about the person that says, I'm going to get up, I'm going to leave this country where I know the people, I know the language, I know the customs, I can go somewhere I don't know any of that. I might not even have a job. Whatever it is about you that causes that to happen, that's very much in line with an entrepreneur.
There's additional
Yes.
obstacles that are currently in place for H1B.
Right.
So, I mean, one would assume that for them to have this entrepreneurial spirit, like I'm going to go somewhere else, and in addition to go through all of the requirements to get H1B visas, that it would be that once you make that free and open, that there's some assumption that they would be less entrepreneurial, or you would stick with your assumption that they are staying in the same level?
Yeah, I guess in one sense you could argue that the more bars you put in the way, the finer the filter is. So now you've got a trade-off of do you want more intensely entrepreneurial people but fewer of them, or will you take lesser entrepreneurial but still entrepreneurial but more of them?
And that's my question, because you're talking about the guys who started Google,
right.
And you're talking about probably the most extreme in those cases, the real serious entrepreneurial who, they're exactly what you're talking about. It's really extreme, who's going through everything they can to get here so they can do this.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you're going to see some kind of strange curve where it's going to be, you're going to have a bunch of benefit from allowing in more, but then it's going to tail off, and then it's going to tail off slowly as...
Right, yeah. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you this. The nature of the entrepreneurs will be different. Right now, with the H1B, you're restricting to people who are in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. If you got rid of this entirely, there are other entrepreneurs out there who aren't into any of these fields. And so you'll have entrepreneurs coming in who are involved in different things. And all of a sudden you might not have it. Whereas we had a tech boom in the past, maybe it's going to be some other kind of boom. But a boom that is a function of people who have different sorts of educations. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Are currently H1B visas here for 5 years, 10 years, and the renewal process?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I believe, if I'm correct, am I right, it's 6 years? 6 years for H1B, and then you get the green card or you don't.
And typically what happens?
I don't know the answer to that. Other than to point out that the number of applications is gargantuan compared to the number of slots. I believe it's a case that we hit our quota for 2010, like currently, we're hitting it now. Please say in April of the previous year. Yes, sir?
Actually, you bring up that again, but isn't Intel one of the largest users of H1B visas?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, so at least to some extent, the people who are creating these companies are also using the system. So you'd expect that to continue in the future.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Are you taking your conclusions and applying them to, say, one industry, say pharmaceuticals, and does it work?
No, I haven't, and that would be an interesting thing to do. The data that I have is all very macro, so it's talking about the economy as a whole.
From a member's point of view, it's often industry specific.
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical companies in their area of the intel.
Yeah, exactly. Not just industry specific, but to talk about a particular area. Talk about the Research Triangle, North Carolina, for example. Yeah, and to get into that makes for a nice partnership. If you have data that's specific to that, you get something like me, and we would get together and doing this kind of analysis tailored specifically to what your area is. Thank you for your time.